Good to see you all, and I'm going to grab one in just a second. So there's two here. Just grab either one and push it. Can you hear? Good. All right. So thank you, Dustin, for this invitation, and also to the staff. Y'all have been great. Everything has been extremely well planned, and I really appreciate this invitation. As you can see, the photo here is right after I got back from Switzerland. This is what chocolate and cheese does to you after 4 years. So I'm working on it, trying to get off that addiction. But I thought what I would do is just give you a visual view of the ambassadorship. And many people think an ambassadorship is something it really isn't. And I thought if I walk you through the process and walk you through the day in a life of a U.S. ambassador overseas, you get to see a little more reality of what we actually accomplish and what our purpose is while we're overseas. This here is the swearing in. That's the first thing you do that makes you an official ambassador. And there's a lot that goes on before this. You're vetted. 76 of my friends had an FBI agent knock on their door and say, I need to talk to you about Ed McMullen. I had about 50 of them call me and say, what did you do wrong? But the fact is, they even found my 8th grade girlfriend, who I still stay in touch with, and interviewed her. So if you're interested in ambassadorship, be sure and understand they are going to go deep, right? They're going to know what you've done in your life. But I've known President Trump and worked for him for many, not worked for him in a professional way other than ambassador, but worked with him in the 2014 campaign and the 2020 campaign. It could not work for him, but was actually overseas while I was there. Presidents generally choose ambassadors who they know and they trust. The first ambassadors from the United States was Benjamin Franklin. He went to France. He was a delegate over there. They didn't call them ambassadors at the time, but he was an amazing ambassador, set the tone for our State Department. And then Thomas Jefferson was the second ambassador overseas. So there's a long history of presidents appointing people whom they trust. They know they can talk and converse with. And that's the difference between the two types of ambassadors. They're career ambassadors and they're political ambassadors. 2/3 are career. They go from the Foreign Service all over the world in the most difficult places. I have immense respect for these ambassadors and these Foreign Service officers. The other third are political ambassadors. A lot of people think, why do we do this? Why do presidents choose people to send overseas? And I can tell you there is a reason. It goes back to Franklin and Jefferson. The reason is because, in fact, those people in the major countries of the world expect you, as the ambassador and representative of the United States, to have a direct relationship with the president. Foreign Service employees are bureaucrats. They don't have those relationships. When I speak to someone in Switzerland, in the government, they want to know that I'm actually speaking on behalf of the president. This was my first day in Bern. This is the residence behind me. It was the first press conference I held, and it basically set the tone for what I was going to be doing and what the president's agenda was and the country team agenda for Switzerland. And it was intimidating. I mean, you don't see this, but in front of me were probably 60 cameras from all over Europe. And they wanted to know what President Trump's agenda was for Switzerland and Europe, frankly. And so it was a bit intimidating. First time I've had 60 cameras in my face and the questions coming at me, but it was something that you have to get accustomed to. This here is the actual presentation of credentials. You actually present your credentials from the president to the president of the country you are a guest in. And this is President of Switzerland. She was there for many years and became a great friend of the United States, Doris Leuthard. I arrived also with a clear directive from the president. The president basically has a country plan he gives you. He makes clear what that is. In Switzerland, the president knew there were great jobs, huge economic development opportunities for the United States. He made it very clear he wanted to move Switzerland from the 8th largest foreign direct investor in the United States to the 7th largest. I actually set the tone internally to be the 6th largest, and we achieved that victory actually 4 months before we left. which is a huge, huge asset. A small country of 8 million people goes from the 8th largest foreign direct investor in the U.S. into the 6th largest. It was ahead of Germany at the time. President Trump also visited Switzerland twice. He came to Davos, the World Economic Forum. He called me after I came and settled in, and he said, "What's going on?" And this is another reason why these career ambassadors versus the political ambassadors, and it goes beyond President Trump. This is, you can insert whatever president it is that we talk about, and this is how the ambassadors operate. But he made it clear that he wanted to understand how were the Europeans really seeing things, because we didn't get out to country until about 7 months after the president was inaugurated through this process. And I said, "Sir, it doesn't look good. You've basically had the media defining your administration and your policies in Europe. They're completely different from what you're trying to achieve. What do you recommend?" I recommend you come into the belly of the beast. Come to Davos. Explain exactly what your policies are. America first does not mean America alone. He did it. He set the tone. It made very clear from then on. He was invited to Davos twice thereafter. And he had huge success with bilateral meetings. When the president would go in to Switzerland, he was able to actually, to Davos. People think these are just junkets. 2 days and at least 20 different country leaders that he would do bilateral meetings. This is the one with Switzerland and the president of Switzerland. Hugely helpful for any president to use these resources to be able to meet instead of flying around the world meeting with world leaders. Another thing that we accomplish as ambassadors is the many agreements that you sign. Switzerland being a neutral country, their neutrality was hugely helpful because they had the situation where they could negotiate in ways no other country in NATO could, because NATO was an ally. Switzerland has friends everywhere. And they use those protecting powers very helpfully, and I'll show you how in a few minutes. The first major speech that I really gave was on trade and the economy, and this was an amazing opportunity at one of the universities in Zurich. That dais is where Churchill in 1946 gave the famous speech, "Arise, Europe." It was the precursor to what would become the EU. And every speaker that's invited to the Europa Institute to speak better have something relevant to say when you're following on the heels of Churchill and that speech. And we really did set the tone for an economic vision for Europe and the United States that panned out to be an extremely successful vision. Secretary of State Cassis in Switzerland was a huge friend and advocate. That's the other thing an ambassador has to be able to do. You have to stay in touch. You have to engage. You have to, the Secretary of State of a country rarely meets with ambassadors, but they meet with the American ambassadors because they know the importance of the relationship. So you have to be prepared and ready to do what it takes. I did because the new president of Switzerland, the first thing he did was call me and say, Mr. Ambassador, there has never been a Swiss ambassador, a Swiss president in the Oval Office. Never been in the history of our relationships. And I said, well, how do we change that? He said, well, I'm ready to go and have a serious conversation because we were working on a free trade agreement. So I was able to call the president, our little red line in our office, tell him what transpired, and within 3 weeks, President Trump had invited the president, and this meeting occurred. This was a huge meeting because it set a historic change in our relationship, and it also helped the free trade agreement move along extremely well. And it, I think, really did make a difference in the minds of the Swiss about how important they are to the United States. Tax treaties are another example. You're always dealing with these. It took us 8 years that was stuck in the Senate. I came back to Washington, said, look, this is a tax treaty that helps Americans. We've got to get this done. So you're not just dealing with what's going on in the country you're in. You're trying to make sure that the country that you're in is actually having an effect and having the effects of what's going on in the United States. You spend a lot of time in Congress briefing them and letting them know what's going on. My other country that I represented as well was Liechtenstein. Every ambassador told me, oh, you'll present your credentials to the prince and you'll never go back. Wrong. One of the wealthiest families in the world is the Liechtenstein family. Prince Alois huge friend of the United States. I spent more time in Liechtenstein than I ever thought I would, and they've become amazingly good friends of the United States. Huge investment. Never listen to what people tell you should do. Always explore. Always look at what's really going on behind the surface, because this relationship would never be what it is today, and it's a huge relationship. Here are the achievements. The country team mission was clearly improve and increase investment. We did it. We reached the 6th largest FDI. Why was it so important? It was important because the average job from Switzerland in the United States pays over $104,000 a year. They're high tech, they're research and development. They are huge jobs and very important to our economy. And we really did work hard on that, and I'm very proud of the success we had. One of the things that really impacted me was the president's determination to get the Iranian hostages that were being held, Americans being held in Iran in Evin prison, home. They were innocent people. This was a professor from Princeton. He was a student. He was lured into Iran to basically do research on plants. He was out in the countryside researching plants, arrested. Little child, never saw him, born while he was in Evin prison. No one ever did anything to get him out for years. And Dr. Wang came home because of the work that was done by the team. And that was something that really was an impressive sight. To be there on the tarmac, hand him the U.S. flag, and he broke down. Freedom really does mean something when you see it. Another person who came home was Mr. White, Michael White. Michael White was a Navy officer who they took, an American Navy officer who was lured in by a woman on the internet and a girlfriend he thought he had. It was actually an Iranian plant. And what happened is Michael White was trained in the military. They couldn't wait to get rid of Michael White. He was a little easier to get home than the others, but he caused them great consternation, and he was very pleased to get home as well. He never thought he'd be there. Things like the forgotten cemetery from World War II, where American soldiers were actually buried, that Americans had forgotten. Literally 10 miles from my residence in Bern was a field of American soldiers. And every Veterans Day, I would go to the British cemetery to celebrate fallen soldiers. But I had a citizen not far outside Bern say, "Why do you not come to the cemetery?" I said, "What cemetery?" Ambassadors had been told about this, and they didn't pay attention to this. But we restored the cemetery. It is now where American ambassadors and Americans go to celebrate Veterans Day. There are many, many beautiful places in Switzerland, and that's the other great advantage. You get to see the Abbey in St. Gallen, the very, very ancient Abbey. If you go, you have to go there. It's truly beautiful, beautiful town. The other thing you do is you actually have to represent this cabinet secretaries who come to Switzerland or into Liechtenstein. You have to be there when they're doing representational work. We had Betsy DeVos, who was the education secretary. We had the president 2 times, as I said, in Davos, meeting with world leaders. We had Secretary of State Pompeo, who stayed at the residence for 4 days during a bilateral meeting on free trade. Extremely strong, positive Secretary of State who really had great success in moving us forward. We did this state dinner, which was the most sought-after dinner in Switzerland in decades. I had to actually choose 20 people who would sit at that table. That was a tough thing to do. But it was productive. We achieved what we had hoped to. Ivanka Trump, I bring this up because she's much maligned, and I have to tell you, one of the brightest women, and any other woman who was treated the way she's been treated would be absolutely undermined by the media, or whoever undermined her would be undermined by the media. But it was open season on Ivanka. She was a business person. She was highly well educated. She was professional, and she was hugely helpful as a great patriot. She loved her country, and she converted to Judaism, and she understood the issues that were at stake between the Abraham Accords and other critics, and she was really helpful there, she and her husband. But she was also very helpful with our free trade agreement. She was a secret weapon. The Swiss actually buy a lot of actual military materials from the United States. We sold $6 billion in F-35s. This was watching the Swiss Air Force from the top of the Alps, seeing how they fly and watching and helping make the sale. That was a huge thing because Switzerland, being neutral, doesn't like to have a big military. But they also recognize the threats in Europe, and they are prepared for those threats. This here, I put this in because it shows you the ancient dress of diplomats. It's embarrassing. I look like the guy on the Monopoly thing in this thing here. But it can be trying, but you suck it up and you move forward and you do what you're supposed to do. You get many, many invitations and you meet many new friends. And my wife and I are very proud that we accepted nearly every invitation. We kept busy. We had a fantastic time in Switzerland, and we're very grateful for the time we had. If you have the chance, this is the beauty of Switzerland. You have to go. Don't miss it in your lifetime. It is a bucket list item. Right now, the cows are coming down from the Alps. This is what you would see on the back roads of Switzerland. They decorate the cows and they celebrate the beautiful animals that make them, their cheese, and all that they celebrate in their culture. The goats, too. The goats are celebrated as well. This here is the beautiful view from the residence, looking out over the gardens, and then also the Alps in the distance, the Jungfrau. The American residence is the center of diplomacy in Switzerland. And it is an amazing opportunity for us, my family and myself, to have had this great experience to represent the United States and the people of the United States. And I can tell you, the relationship continues to be strong. And it's strong because there are diplomats who work very hard to continue that. Professionals, career, non-career political appointments. If you ever have the opportunity, do go to Switzerland. But also stay engaged in international affairs because you have no idea how important it is for Americans to get out and see what's going on in the world. Too many of us sit here in the United States, this beautiful country, this beautiful place we call home, and take it for granted. But the rest of the world is out there, and there's so much we can achieve if we just work together. Thank you.